Okay, welcome to the show, Brett. How are you?
Thanks. I'm doing good.
So, where are you right now? Are you in New York or?
I'm usually in New York. I'm actually currently in New Jersey visiting family.
Today, we want to talk a bit about creativity, but more on that execution side of things, which I think
Mhm.
a lot of marketing people are sometimes separated from. Something that you'd get someone else to do for you with direction. So, we've done an episode before on creative strategy, which is more high level strategy with some advertising agency people locally in Australia. So, I want to go maybe just step down a tiny bit more now to executing that and creating creative assets and all the tools that we could use and approaches we could take.
We can get into it from any level. We can maybe
So,
start high level and then break down, or maybe start from the bottom, go up.
what's your journey so far? Just give us a quick MO of what you've been doing so far.
We started at basically a bunch of hometown friends started an ad agency very quickly. We're like, Facebook ads seem to be the thing that works and that everyone wants. Back then, so this was 2016, 2017. Everything was about ad testing, ad testing, ad testing, which by the way, it still is, and we will talk about that later. But we built a technology that automated ad testing, basically doing generative AI 5, 6 years ago, before it was cool and before anyone actually wanted it. So we built this thing that generated thousands of ads, and we test them all at once. So that's how I kind of got my start in this space of creative strategy, making lots and lots of ads. Then moved over to an agency where we basically did creative strategy for larger e-commerce brands. Moved to another agency, had a studio, filming lots of footage, making lots of ads, et cetera, et cetera. And now I am building my own agency, but it is very creative strategy focused. So yeah, we can get into some of the tactics later. Was I supposed to have an alcohol story for you?
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Do you have one?
I have one. It's not actually at all related to the content, so we don't have to use it if you don't want. So I have this is here a special cognac. Now it's not the super special one I'm going to tell you about, but the the first time that I went over to my fiance's parents' house, very first time we were just starting to date, and I met her parents. Now she's her family comes from Ukraine, like Soviet Ukraine, and they're these super serious, like rags to riches people, like really big mountain people. And you can't tell, but I'm this real little like diminutive guy. So I I come to their house, and before we eat, they pour out a shot of this cognac, and he tells a story about how it's this reserve cognac only for like Armenian royalty. It was gifted to him by a very famous client. Couldn't talk about it, but it is so rare that I literally could not find it online. Like this is this is extremely reserved batch. So he pours out a shot to everyone in the family. Same exact glass, looked just like this. So we're all sitting there. He does an amazing toast. Thank you for coming. It's great to meet you. And we all whip the shot back. Yeah, you ever have Everclear? So this was much higher percent than expected. So I knock this thing back, and I'm on fire. Like I can't breathe. My throat is tightening. My eyes dilate. Like, and I'm trying not to like gag it and cough it out. And I look up. I'm like shaking. I put my shot glass down, and all of them except for me had taken a tiny little sip because they knew how strong it was. And I look around. I'm like, I've made a fool of myself. They're never gonna accept me into this family. Like I fucking ruined everything. And then, of course, they all burst out laughing because they obviously knew this was going to happen. And I was like, I'm safe. But that is my short journey.
I love it. That's great. I think, like, I've talking to Mike Taylor about this around memetics, right? Because I think there's a lot of discussions around being original when it comes to creative production, right? And we had an
Yeah.
argument around, like, I was a bit sort of for being unique and creative, and he was a bit more on the side of memetics or copying something else, like memes themselves. That's where it comes from, memetics, right? So it's like a copy of something, and iterating on that. So I think it's really interesting. I think do you think there's a bit of a fallacy around trying to create something that's completely unique that hasn't been done before versus maybe taking something that's already existing and adapting or tweaking it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I love this question so much because what creative strategy used to be is very creative and people trying to make ads that make a lot of money. And now it's, oh, let's go see what the competitor is doing and do the exact same thing. And I can see both sides. I can see both sides. And I'm firmly on your side in the creative camp. But what I see a lot is copying the main frameworks that seem to work and always have worked. So you see these kind of traditional advertising formats like before and after ads. You see comparisons, this brand versus that brand versus that brand. You see big, huge headlines, big sale ads, right? These kinds of things are very direct response and they tend to work very well. So everyone is copying everyone else's iterations on those main formats. And I will say, if you're a new brand starting from scratch, definitely do that, right? Let's get your foot in the door, get the things that work out. But what we're starting to see is these brands that are spending hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars a day, a week, a month, a year to basically make the same ad over and over. And they start to see this fatigue, right? So these ads no longer work as well, but they keep trying to do it because everyone else is doing it. And so we're getting this convergence on just a few ad types, these same core ad types. And all of a sudden people are saying, oh, my CPAs are going up, my CPMs are going up. I can't get these things to work. It's like, well, yeah, you're doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result, right? The thing that people don't realize is that the Facebook ad auction, TikTok ad auction, any other social media platform, even programmatic, right? They're all auction places. And so you're competing for the attention of your audience with every other brand in your space. And if you're in a competition, the thing that you need to do is to make something better than your competition. But if you're making the same thing as them because you're all kind of focused on these core formats that you think work, then oftentimes you're not going to get anywhere. And before I present kind of the opposite side of it, which is what I believe in strongly, I'll say one thing. When you are a creative strategist at a company, or if you are a founder or a growth leader and all you care about is the bottom line and you're trying to scale your company, I understand why you're using memetics. It's because it is the easiest and fastest thing to do, right? You don't want to have to do real strategy. You don't want to have to do real research because it takes a lot of time, right? So what you end up seeing is not only is there pressure to just get things out every single week because you need new stuff to fill the account so that you can get better performance, but you see everyone kind of copying each other because it's easier to go onto a platform like Foreplay or Atria, which are great platforms to see competitors' ads, and then you just kind of break that down, put it in ChatGPT, get a script, send it to a creator, and they're popping that into the ad account. So again, understand why this is happening, but I think generally it's not great for the industry. And the alternative is actually something incredible, which you mentioned earlier, and which is what advertising kind of always was and always should be, right? Which is creative strategy, like actually coming up with completely new concepts. And what you'll find is if you spend the time to learn about your audience, to learn about the market space, what's trending, and you do new things, you kind of aggregate all that information into a funnel and you actually create something new. Oftentimes you get much better performance because people are like, oh, wow, that's new. Your audience is scrolling through a feed. And so what they want to do is they want to find something interesting. If you make the 10 millionth before and after ad, they're going to see that and go, okay, I've seen this before. Right? There's no differentiation. If you come up with some wild concept, then, they're at least going to stop and probably going to say, hey, I wonder who made this. Like, this is pretty interesting.
And I think you touched on a couple of things that I've been thinking about as well. Inherently, if you hire a vendor, like an agency or someone who then outsources to an agency, whatever, to do a lot of your marketing collateral, they're a business. They want to make margin on that account. So what do? They produce creative with the least resources possible to increase their margin. And what does that mean? They'll use tools and stuff, and it's cheaper to copy than it is to, like you said, go through that whole process of creating something genuinely unique. So I think these decades of reliance on tools and agencies and vendors to do that thinking for us is great for efficiency's sake. But the trade-off, I think, is the effectiveness. And like you said, it may work for a small brand, but you get to these sort of diminishing laws of return where the curve flattens. And I think that's where it gets really interesting. And then there's sort of like this output trap cycle, I call it. So you get stuck in this like, oh, well, let's keep doing that, or let's try an iteration of that. And it sort of regresses you and your thinking into a very small space. And if you want to do actual proper customer research, like picking up a phone and calling a customer, or like observing them when they're buying your product in real time or something like that, then you pick up things that none of those other tools or people would have picked up because it's a new data point. Whereas I think all these tools regress us. And I think the second point is around this quality score. So I don't know if people are listening who actually get their hands dirty in some of these programs, but when you're shipping the creative into these platforms, you often get a quality score. Google Ads does this, Facebook, Meta, Instagram Ads does this, and that quality score determines how much it determines the price that you pay to a certain extent. So the higher the quality score, the less you pay, to an extent. And then also the longevity of that piece, getting engagement and everything. So what these platforms want to do, obviously, is they don't want people jumping off their platform or being exposed to too many ads that are boring, right? They want something that's actually, it could be sponsored, but entertaining and keeps people on platform. So how do they do that? They give you a quality score, and they try to prioritize ads that have a high quality score and deprioritize those with a low quality score. And yeah, it's just really interesting. I think, that doesn't get talked about enough for whatever reason.
Yeah, it is funny you mentioned that because this is one of the first things I talk to friends about because almost no one knows how the Facebook ad auction actually works. Like these are people that are spending their entire livelihoods making Facebook ads, running Facebook ads. Yeah, they literally tell you exactly what quality means to them. There's an entire chart, there's a page dedicated to it. And then within the ad platform, they tell you each ad, which one is low, medium. They actually say above average, average, or below average quality. So you can even see yourself in reference to your competitors. And it is a real, like, you really can see CPMs increase if you don't abide by their kind of rules. Even basic things, just like don't be too sensational, which is kind of common sense because, if you have a lie on your platform, right, a lie in your ad, and they go to your landing page and they see that's not true, right? Facebook doesn't want that experience for their users. Just to give you like a clear, it's really simple the way the Facebook algorithm works. I mean, obviously it's very complex, but what they tell us about the quality is it's three things, right? It's the bid, obviously, like how much you're bidding does come into play a tiny bit. If you're going to give them $1 million a day versus 100,000, it's going to be harder for you, and that's why you see smaller brands have a harder time than larger brands, just because they need to be able to actually beat them with just the creative itself. So that is one piece. But the other piece is, as you mentioned, the quality of the experience for the user on the inside, right? They're scrolling through, they have to not churn from the platform. So the way that they define quality is how likely they think someone is to report that ad or to actually stop using the platform. And they have a way of measuring that. So they, every time someone scrolls past a thing, every time someone clicks on a thing, all of that data that is recorded in your individual brand's pixel, it is all aggregated on the back end on Facebook. So they can see every single thing all at once, and they're using that to measure. So there's the bid, there's the quality of experience. And then the last thing, which is also really important, but it's the likelihood of converting. So if they think you're more likely to get someone to purchase than your competitor, they will actually give you that audience versus even a bigger brand. And so that's where the importance of creative actually comes from. It's, can you convince the audience to purchase more than your competitor can? And is it done in such a way that the customer isn't kind of thrown off by it? And that's the only way you can beat the big brands that have infinite budget.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think the other thing that maybe doesn't get talked about is if you have a low quality score, it may rack up the same sort of metrics like views, engagement, reach, likes, or whatever, right? But they're just going to serve you junk inventory, like bot users, which will max out the vanity metrics, but like you won't get any purchases in the back end. So I think there's a couple of like erroneous signals that they'll shove in there. I've noticed that anyway. It's like, hey, let's go for a reach metrics and max out those things. I'm like, yeah, why didn't anybody buy? Like 100,000 people saw this ad, and you're like,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
just served you junk inventory.
It's interesting. A lot of times, especially I see this in very small brands or massive brands. Very small brands, I see they'll only put spend into boosting organic posts with an eye on reach. The assumption is, as you're saying, like if more people are seeing it, there's better performance. But I think right now, if you read, there's this great guy, Bob Hoffman, he runs a newsletter
Yeah.
called Ad Contrarian. Yeah, he's always talking about how there's Facebook platform will be like, hey, your ad's going to 400 million people in the United States, and the population of the United States is like 330 million. It's just like very clearly there is garbage traffic on the platform, like literally not real people. And so when you do reach campaigns, when you do traffic, when you do organic, oftentimes those are the people that you're actually targeting. And if you're in the paid ads account, if you're actually in the platform and you're targeting traffic, yeah, oftentimes you're literally targeting nobody. So I see this in very small brands that just don't know better. And then even very, very large brands that are focused on like brand awareness campaigns, which I think sometimes is like, we just need to put our budget somewhere because the boss said we're not going to get to use this money if we don't. So they're just like, let's put this somewhere. Or, you got VCs that are breathing down their throats like, we need to put 60% of our budget into Facebook ads. Like, but the cost caps are on too tight. You can't get enough spend through and you got to put it into awareness campaigns. So, anyway. don't do traffic campaigns. That's the message at the end of that story.
Yeah, it's the biggest scam ever. Yeah. So on that note, let's talk about creating the assets in the first place. Do you have like a bit of a high level step by step sort of process you go through, no matter how big or small the customer is? Just very high level, and then let's go down to like more the tactical level of like executing that, which tools you use and things like that.
So when we talk about creating assets, do you mean creating the actual ads? Do you mean creating assets to create the ads? Do you mean coming up with the ideas? Or do you want me to just go through all of it?
Let's go from top to bottom. So let's like start right at the top. Okay, I'm a new client. I've come to you. I'm a consultant that wants to sell strategy workshops or something like in my local area, right? What would you do if I came on as a client? Like, I'm telling you about my business and the products I do, but like, let's just take it from there. What's the steps that you go through?
So first step, you tell me everything you possibly can about your brand, where it came from, you love it, all these little details about your values and your colors and your fonts and your logos. And we ingest all of that information. And then the key thing that many people miss is doing actual research. So you talk to some customers. Like, I'm going to go, hey, how often do you talk to your clients? Do you have any feedback forums? Have you ever done interviews before? Can you give me any kind of information that is who your audience is? Do you have any analytics like Google Analytics? Can we see your audience? Are you mostly male, female? Where are they located? What are they doing? If you're a local business, that makes it a little easier because you have a much smaller demographic and you kind of know a little bit more about who those people are. But that's always going to be step one. And once we have that information, then we'll go and look at what's your competitive space look like? Who are your top 5 competitors? Who are the kind of bigger players in the space? So, if you're talking about agencies, you're going to have the big 4 agencies, and then you probably have some local competitors that you're really competing with on the day-to-day. Then you want to look at the trends, like what's going on in the world right now. Is there any big political situation? Is there any kind of meme that's really going around? Is there a particular person that is being talked about? So you want to combine all of those aspects. And once you do, you put that all in one place and you funnel that through a creative process. So there's 2 different kind of major creative processes that you can use. Really, there's one core process that everyone naturally uses when you're unconscious about it. And then there's a way of speeding up that creative process. So this is probably the most important part. The formal creative process was actually ironically laid out by some advertisers and then backed up by some research way after that. But of course, the creative ad men and, way back in the day had to figure this out. So the formal process is you have some kind of problem, right? This could be any kind of problem, but in this case, we're trying to come up with ads that will scale your business. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to think really, really hard about the problem. We're going to look at all of the information that we just ingested from the research, and then we're going to look at completely unrelated information. And by that, like when I was talking earlier about you doing this unconsciously, usually that just means you're going about your life, right? You have some problem at work, and then you're just, you hang out, you watch TV, you read a book.
Or you're walking down the road, right? And you're sort of thinking to yourself subconsciously, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Like you're just kind of picking up on your sensory experience of reality. And those things are getting funneled through this problem space that you're in. And when that happens, eventually you have an idea. Now, there's 2 different ways that people have ideas. If you're trying to come up with ideas for a specific purpose, like in this case, you're going to sit down and you're going to be like, okay, I need to come up with an idea for an ad. Sometimes that can be very hard. If you just have a blank page, even with all of this information in your mind, a lot of times you still get stuck, right? So it can be very hard to do that. The other big problem that I see with people just kind of using the formal process is you're going to sit down, whatever the first idea that comes to mind is, that's the thing you're going to use, right? You're just going to sit down and like write out the thing. So that's what most people do. You come up with a bunch of ideas, then usually you take some more time off, walk around, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you share with your colleagues afterwards and they tear it apart, right? They're like, actually, this is garbage. Here's all the things you should fix. So that's the formal creative process. The way that you can speed up that process is what you want to do is take each of those steps and then isolate the things that you need to do to basically get more reps in. And what I mean by that is you have a problem, right? You have an information collection stage. So rather than you just kind of walking around, reading books, watching movies, whatever, you can actually be systematic about collecting information, right? You have all of your brand information, you put it in one place, and then, okay, I need to come up with ads. I'm going to go and look at a list of hobbies. I'm going to go and look at all of my friends' jobs, right? There are these different kind of parts of reality that you can use as a filter for what you're coming up with. This is an idea called like combinatorics, which is how we came up with like thousands and thousands of ads. Yeah.
So could one of those things be like just scrolling down LinkedIn or something and looking at what your colleagues are writing about or talking about, and then you sort of like subconsciously go, "Oh, that's a cool way of framing that thing I was already talking about." Is that an example or?
Yeah. I mean, that is one thing you can do. And I think actually this is what most people do that are in creative strategy is they'll use other social media sites and just kind of scroll through. The other big thing, as I was mentioning earlier, is people will just look at other people's ads and they'll copy those one for one. The way that you can be a little bit more creative and the way that you can speed up this process is taking things that you wouldn't normally think of and trying to make very far connections with your brand. So that's why I like things like a list of hobbies or lists of like sports, just large lists of information that are essentially, when you get a list, actually what you're seeing is an enumeration of concepts, right? So even if you can go to like any physics book or go to some random science, chemistry, whatever, the table of elements, right? Any of these things, they're simple concepts, right? Each element is a concept. You can read about the features of that thing. And then what you want to do is you try and figure out, okay, how do I combine lithium with an ad agency, right? And there are probably some properties, like lithium, for example, is one of the things. I think if you ever heard of the people licking rocks, you know about that?
Licking rocks? What?
Oh, okay, you haven't heard of it. So basically, I think it was ancient Rome or Greece, but there's this whole population in some area of the world, and I'm going to sound like an idiot because I'm probably wrong about the place. But these people are like much happier and they live much longer lives because they were licking rocks that were local to their environment. And it turned out that all of these rocks had lithium in it. And so now lithium is actually, it's now a medication people use for bipolar to like stabilize mood. And it's extremely effective. Um, so anyway, that's an example of, okay, now we found this rabbit hole from this one random element on this, we were just looking at a table of elements and so ad agency services. Okay, this is kind of funny. Like people are just licking rocks. What does that have to do with advertising? So the intro to the ad is people are just licking rocks. They're like walking around. So you hook an audience, like, what the hell is that? And you look closer, like, we make our customers so happy that they're like the people licking rocks in ancient Greece or Rome or whatever. Maybe that's a shit idea. But what happens is you come up with 100 of those. You have a whole table of elements, is 100x elements, right? You go through each of them, and basically, at least as far as I've seen, you get about one good idea out of every 100. So if you are coming on board, what we want to do is we want to do all that research, and then we want to come up with at least 100 ideas for every ad that we're going to make. And it seems like a lot, but when you systematically do it that way, you can actually do it in like 30 minutes or an hour, right? Because you're not just sitting down and trying to come up with something from scratch. You have this system that you can use where you funnel information through the other information.
Oh, this is great. Yeah. So like you've got sort of connections that are happening between what you want to sell and versus all these other information sources. And I just think of like two words putting together, but we're talking about concepts here, like portmanteaus almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, portmanteaus. And so that's just one technique. The other thing that you can do is there are all these things called creativity techniques. And what I just described is called combinatorics. That's my favorite. And I think it's the most effective if you're trying to be really fast and systematic. But there are literally hundreds of these things. I encourage you to go and just type creativity techniques into Google. And what you'll find is all these systems, just to name two others that are really effective. One is called Scamper. This was also made by an ad guy, Alex Osborne. I believe he started one of the big four, some big ad agency. And Scamper, it's an acronym. There's S means substitute, C means combine, A means I can't do them all. M means modify, E is eliminate, and R is like reduce or resize.
Adapt.
Yeah.
Combine, adapt, modify, put to another use, eliminate, reverse. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Okay. So each of those things that you just said, they're just ways that you can change information to get some new information.
Like frameworks, basically.
Yeah, the frameworks. Yeah, exactly. They're just frameworks. If you want to speed up creativity, it's super easy to use them because you'll have all this information. Now, of course, you need to do the research to actually funnel it through these things. You can't kind of just come to these with nothing because you'll have nothing to put through it. So you need both sides of those. But once you have all the research in place and you have a technique, it's really easy to come up with ad ideas.
I'm reminded of, and before we get to the tools and that kind of thing, because everyone wants to know tools, I'm just reminded of this thing that was going around. It was like the hero's story. So, like, okay, we've got this unique creative process, right? Mingling things, create something a bit more unique. But then the other thing
Yeah.
is you've got these tried and true methods that sort of work. And one of the things that comes to mind is this the hero's story. I think someone wrote a book on this, but I saw this
Yeah.
viral meme going around on Twitter, which was the Harry Potter story, right? Boy orphaned, meets uncle, takes him under his wing, and then fights against this and then they overlaid Star Wars, and it's the exact same thing in just a different context, right? Like it's word for word the same thing. Orphan boy, uncle takes him in, blah 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 blah, and I was just like, oh my god. So all J.K. Rowling did was take Star Wars, which is basically a meme of Dune, right? Which is probably a meme of something else anyway, and they're just like recontextualize into something else. So like, can we do something as basic as that with the creative process as well? Like take something from maybe a
Yeah.
completely different industry, or maybe even not business, and then just rehash it and recontextualize it in selling agency services or something.
Yeah. I love this. I love this. The hero's journey. Yeah. Joseph Campbell. It's the hero's myth. The Hero with a Thousand Faces. That is the book by Joseph Campbell. It is a
Okay.
phenomenal book. And there's a guy, Donald Miller, I want to say, who wrote a book called Story Brand, which he actually takes that and applies it to branding. I think it works really, really well for higher level branding. For individual ads, at least for performance marketing, if you're doing a brand ad, I think Hero's Journey works. We can talk about movies in a second because Barbie and the Lego movie are some of the greatest ad campaigns of all time, and those are heroes' journeys. So it fits that mold. When you're doing a performance marketing ad, you actually want to start in media res. So rather than starting at the beginning of the journey, you want to start in the center where either you first come upon the big problem, like the big baddie, or you're solving that problem, because those are the things that will grab attention the most. And for the most part, people can assume that first part of the journey, right? They can understand, and they themselves usually feel like they're somewhere in the middle, right? Like no one really feels like they're beginning their journey. So I would say that the hero's journey works really well for larger brand movements, but in performance marketing, you actually want to start like smack in the center when you first get that kind of big challenge, when the challenger appears.
Let's just say that we've done the brief, right? We've got all the information. We've done the combinatory or creative sort of like messy iterative process, right? And then we try to filter that, like so 1 out of 100 ideas. So we'll run them through some kind of filter, right? Maybe it's personal. We score them like rice or something, like what is it, viability? What's the IDEO thing? Like viable,
Feasible, viable, desirable.
so you can run them through like filters like that or whatever, like, hey, is this too outlandish? Will we get sued for this? Or like, does this actually make sense?
Yeah.
Or, run it through some customers as a bit of a like, hey, what do you think of this? And if they get really confused, drop it. Or some kind of like, I would say quality filtering process, right? Then you've got your creative, iterative ideas that you're then going to like do some stuff with. Like what happens then? Does it just go straight into production and you create some storyboards or some mock-ups, or what do you do after that?
So usually when you come up with ideas, it's either like a headline, it's some fragment of a visual. I always try and have both a copy angle and a visual idea. And then you have to write a full brief out of those things. So there's a few different kinds of briefs, right? It depends on whether or not you need just assets created or if you are actually going to the finished product straight from the idea. And it just depends on what kind of idea you have, right? If you already have a bunch of videos and images and you can make the idea already with what you have, cool. You're going to write a design brief. A design brief is scene by scene, something for the designer to use your current assets, stitch together, and create the actual idea. So that's the easiest thing to do, and that's what most creative strategists are doing on the day to day. They're writing tons of design briefs using assets they already have, and the designer just uses that. There's there are some assets that a designer can create. So if you have someone who can do illustration, if you have someone who can use generative AI now, so for example, you might need a model shot. You might need someone doing something absolutely ridiculous, like flying through the sky with wings, of an angel, right? You're not going to spend a bunch of money in a studio anymore to go and shoot some crazy shot. You're going to go on Midjourney and ask it for that image. You're going to go use ChatGPT and DALL-E, and it's going to pump out that image. So designers can generate some assets to fill in. And a lot of times now in a brief, you can just say, hey, can you use these things so you can, make an asset for this? Now, there are two other kinds of briefs. One of them goes to a content creator. If there's this huge movement, and it's still going on now, for UGC, user-generated content, and in the past couple of years, it's become so effective that people stop using real customers and they started just filming content creators who are people that you can pay to make ads for you and act like they're your real customers. And because you have a little bit more control over that, it tends to actually even work better a lot of times. So that's another kind of brief, is a content creator brief. A content creator brief, if you haven't worked with them before, which in most cases you're not, and if you want, we can get into the nitty gritty of how to find good content creators. But yeah, if it's not someone you've worked with, you got to tell them everything about your brand. If you've done any research, you want to give them all the research that you've done, so they have all of the information possible. And then there are two different kinds of content creator briefs. One is you give them a full script, word for word. Here's the thing that I want you to do, and make it for me. That can be really good if you have a great content creator and they're creative and they can pull it off. I would say most of the time it is way too hard to actually pull it off feasibly, or to look authentic, because you've written them a full script and they're usually going to read off your script word for word. So it can be a little hard to do that. So the other option, and again, depends on the creator, but I love this. You can just give a bunch of talking points to the creator, give them all the information about the brand, send them the product, and go make an ad. And if you have someone who is decent, or even if they're not that good, getting all of that information in one place and then giving them the product, they will have some kind of real personal connection, like a real customer, and then they can just make an ad. So those are the two kinds of briefs you would write for a content creator. And if you have that very specific idea, you're just going to give them that specific idea. And if they're good enough, maybe they can run with it. And I'll say this is even true of a designer. You don't always have to scene for scene spell it out. If you have a really good designer, you can go, hey, here's the general idea, and they'll bang out a great piece of content. That's when you keep that person forever, keep giving them raises, keep them on your staff, do whatever you can, because they are rare, they are unicorns, but they will make you lots of money. So those are the two core kind of briefs. And then there's studio briefs. So if your idea is really just, you can't even do this with Midjourney, it is out there, or you just have a ton of budget, you're working for a big brand. Again, the concept you would write word for word in the same way you would actually write it for a content creator, except usually you have more flexibility. So if you have a full studio, it's like, hey, okay, we're going to set up a whole fake kitchen. Like, hey, I want this real one funny thing hanging from the ceiling, go buy those things, right? You have a little bit more flexibility. You're going to hire people for either half day or full day to like actually film everything that you want filmed. A lot of times if you're a creative strategist or creative director, you're going to be sitting either on Zoom now, which is amazing, or actually at the studio directing people. Like, no, you got the face wrong. Like, can you make sure you're grimacing a little harder from the problem? So real life feedback I've heard before, live in the studio. Yeah. So that's the next step. You get that idea, and you're going to turn it into a brief, and then you're going to send it to that person who's going to actually generate the creative for you.
That's really good for agencies. Let's just say I'm a DIY, right? And I've got a team of one or two, or very small anyway, and I just want to create my own creative assets. Let's just talk tactical tools here, because I was looking at Behance the other day. So like a lot of social media agencies, like all they do is they go into like these tools, and they look at what direct competitors, maybe in a different geography that isn't a direct competitor or whatever, but does the same thing as you. They just look at what they do, then sort of copy it, produce it, and send it back to you, right, to save time. What are those tools that we might be using that you're willing to disclose?
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned a couple earlier. I would say the biggest one right now is called Foreplay, foreplay.co. They have been tracking every Facebook ad in the Facebook ad library, every TikTok ad, every LinkedIn ad, every YouTube short now, and organic content. And it's all collected into one place. And so I would say Foreplay is probably the number one people are going to. You can put those onto boards. You can, if you have multiple clients, if you're an individual small brand, and it's super cheap. It's something like $50 a month. So affordable even for the small guy. They crushed it. They really just got popular in the past, I don't know, maybe 6 months. And now we're starting to see all these competitors crop up. Try Atria. Atria is a really good one. They allow you to actually sort by those frameworks. So earlier I was talking about the convergence. So you can go into their platform now. There's a drop down that goes, show me before and afters only. And you can just see every before and after that's ever been run in the past year, 2 years, 3 years, or whatever. So that convergence will happen faster and faster as the demand for it grows. But yeah, anyway, so those are a couple really good ones to copy people. Behance is nice because you can get design styles, and that's really good for inspiration, just to see, very, very unique, all kinds of designers and different people. So as I was mentioning earlier with the idea, usually you want to have some kind of angle, copy angle, and you want to have a visual idea. So for visual ideas, often I would go to something like Behance, You can go to Foreplay or Atria, of course. There are other sites. It's nice.com is a really good one. So there's all these kind of design sites. You can basically Google design styles and you'll find all kinds of stuff there for the visual side. And then for the idea side, this is a kind of hack that I think is super effective. So I'll share a real secret here. Most people now are doing a lot of video ads, and what you can do with a video ad script, so this is for your brief to a designer, is you can use copywriting formulas. So if you go look up, there's one article I love, it's got like 200 formulas. I think it's by Joanna Weeb of Copy Hackers. And if you just type in like copywriting formulas, I think it's like the third or fourth result. She's got SEO on it and has been updating it for, I think, like a decade. There are all these copywriting formulas, like old school VSLs, like video sales letters. And essentially what you can do is step by step, you write scene by scene your video to match that copywriting framework. So as an example, ADA is the most popular one. ADA means attention, interest, desire, and action. So you try and grab attention with your first scene. You write something super interesting, usually it's a sales copy or something that draws you into the product. You build desire. So however you can build desire, usually it's some kind of direct address of the problem or agitating the problem. That's another framework. And then action, right? Like how can you get them by, which is a call to action. So that's why you see almost every Facebook ad follows this format where you have some attention grabbing hook, someone's punching you through the screen, and then you have product information, right? Something that actually shows you the product and sells the product and talks about the benefits. Then something that tries to build desire, which actually at this point is mostly social proof. So you see three people talking about how much they love the product, blah, blah, it's amazing. Maybe you see some reviews that pop up on the screen. And then you have the call to action or an end card, which is usually just like the product, the logo, and then shop now, try now, 15% off, some kind of incentive to purchase. So that is the main structure of almost every Facebook ad. And there are hundreds of copywriting formulas that you can use to switch up that structure. So I'm going to pause here, but I want to talk about modularity in a second. So
exactly. It just reminds me of the direct response sort of copywriting formula, which is like, problem, offer solution, problem, and agitate the problem, offer the solution, social proof, close kind of thing. Like it's the same sort of like macro framework of any sales. But like, I think this is where people get it wrong if they haven't been in sales or done this before, or measured direct response advertising, is that they start with product like straight away and they go, it's really good, you should buy it. And it's just like, no, you start like with the problem first, right? And then that problem is generally the buying context or situation, that the reason for buying products. Like, and I talk about problem in terms of, it could be a problem opportunity. Like for example, I'm thirsty. What am I going to quench my thirst with? Is it water or is it Coca-Cola? Like that's the buying situation, or that's the problem that I'm in, is that I'm thirsty. I need to be satisfied, right? Same kind of thing with snacks, like, or Friday afternoon watching the game. What am I, can't be stuff cooking. What am I going to do? Well, let's maybe get some takeaway pizza. Like that's, again, the problem state, right? And I think a lot of people who haven't done advertising before or sales, they just start with like, hey, our product's awesome, buy the product. And you're like, yeah, okay, it can work if you've got a lot of excess demand, but otherwise, yeah, you should probably not start with that. And I was just thinking, you're talking about convergence here. Before we were talking about the basic creative process. And again, it's like a very, very simple framework, but it's like you get the divergence phase. I'm going to do it with my hands. Like you go out and then you converge back in. So you filter. So you go really, really wide, like harebrained kind of stuff, brainstorm, and then filter it and come back to a couple of outputs. And that's the basic creative process, really, in a way.
I mean, that's exactly it. Yeah. Come up with lots of things and then only use the good ones.
Yeah. Like or if you do it long enough, you eventually get something good. And it's just funny, when you look at artists, like a famous music artist, whatever, right, or famous films, whatever, you don't see all the songs that they wrote that didn't go anywhere or that they scrubbed, off the writing floor. And sometimes they'll write a whole song, they'll just take one little bit on it and put that into the new song, and that's a really cool kind of hook or background track or something, right? And you'll never see that song before. You only see like survivorship bias, like the ones that make it into the album release, and then you don't see the 100 songs that okay, shit. It's like I think someone was telling like a Grammy award winning artist like Beyonce, whatever, like only 16 of her 300 songs have been like number one hits. It's just like the proportionality is unavoidable, no matter how good you are.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the 80-20 rule, right? And you see this in ad accounts all the time. It's like always you get one ad that sucks up almost all the spend. It's this thing that's been running for 3 years. It's ugly. It's not even the right
Ugly.
product packaging
Yeah.
anymore, but you have to keep running it because it's producing like 80% of your performance, and you're doing everything you can, throwing everything at the wall to try and beat it. But yeah, I mean, usually there is some kind of tail end of the 3,000 ads you've run that
Yeah,
didn't go
and
anywhere.
this
But
and this is the worst thing. My friend was doing that same situation. Also, what was Drift? Oh, that's right. So Drift had this ad, and like someone was giving it shit on LinkedIn, and like, oh, it's the worst ad ever. I'm like, hey, like that's your opinion. Like, cool, man. Like, to quote a movie, but I was like, well, it's probably because it works, right? And then the literal VP of marketing goes, yeah, it's our highest converting ad, kind of thing. Right? It's ugly, but it works. And I was like, okay, there you go. And one of my other friends at a very large health organization was going, he was getting some stick from some of the staff going, oh, why do I keep seeing that ugly, this weird, it was just like this wacky picture of like some woman in a lipstick that just looks like, from 90s clip art or something. And, why do we keep seeing that terrible ad? Like, I'm on my Facebook feed, always seeing that ad is like, okay, that ad converts like 5 times higher. I'm trying to beat it, but I just can't. Like, it's just for whatever reason, it works. Like, would I ever design it that way? No. But hey, it made it in, and it's like, I just can't beat it. Like, what am I doing? So I think there's also that fallacy of making something like picture perfect or pixel perfect and really, really, really finish. Like ugly random ads can work really, really well.
I mean, to that point, Kanye during the Super Bowl, most effective ad, highest performing ad of anything at the Super Bowl was Kanye on his phone in a car, like literally 9 by 16 on a 16 by 9 frame, just like, yo, yeah, I made this new thing, buy it. And I mean, I'm sure he's a celebrity, but like to the point of like not needing super polished. And as a person scrolling through a feed, like, what do you want to look at? I mean, maybe sometimes you want to look at something super polished, but if it feels like an ad, it's usually a turnoff. If you see some guy who just looks like he's, kind of unshaven, he's like sitting in the back of his room, just like, bro, like this product is amazing. Of course, like you actually trust that guy more, right? Because it's like your friend just talking to you, telling you about how much he loves the thing. I mean, it's just human nature.
It's like a common it's like that Tom Fishburne quote, which I think is really interesting. It's like the best advertising doesn't feel like advertising, and I think that's true. Like the best ads don't really look like ads. Often, they're sort of like hidden in a way, or you get the sales
Yeah.
pitch at the end, but they don't start like an ad. They just start like any other piece of content. And that's what I advise clients sometimes. When it comes to social media content as well, especially, is that the best ads is your best organic content. Like, why can't you just take that and then put a sales pitch on the end and boost it? Like, that's what you should be. That's a playground, right? And it's always going to get a high quality score because it's already been proven through like the organic algorithm, which is a lot harder. So why don't you just use that? And they're like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
So talking about research phase, like, hey, why don't you take some stuff that's already worked in your account, use it over here.
Yeah.
So
It's funny you mentioned that. Like, I've had a few clients, especially on the smaller side, that they basically completely built their brands just on organic posting, boosting organic posts. And I came to them and was like, hey, if you try putting some of these in the ad account, like it might do really well. And then, of course, lo and behold, they crushed because first of all, they have all this organic traffic, which is driving most of the performance for the business. And then when you actively try to use it, so one interesting thing is like, um, everyone wants to be very data driven, and I'm also like very data driven. You always want to look at the performance of things, how much attention you're getting, how can we get more attention, and for particular ads and within an individual metric, like attention is a good one. Attention, by the way, is how many people stop to view an ad for 3 seconds or more. That's a somewhat controllable thing in the sense that like you can do all kinds of wild stuff and people will stop to look. Once you get more down funnel towards actual purchases, it's obviously a lot harder to control. And if you could control it, you'd be a trillionaire because that's what everyone's trying to do. But um, we once ran this huge regression, like hundreds of clients, millions of data points across all of the metrics, trying to see if there's any correlation with anything that people were tracking, click through rates, add to carts, attention, all of these different things with actual purchases. And I'm sure you can guess just by the setup here, but like literally nothing correlated with purchases, not a single metric. And it wasn't even close, right? Like the correlations were all over the place. Like there was just very clearly no relationship between any metrics. So anytime someone's trying to sell you on the like, hey, we can get you more click through and we promise you that gets you more purchases. Like it is much more complex ecosystem than that. Now, of course, like if your website looks like shit, if your landing page is, got a 0.05 conversion rate, probably that's the problem and you should look into that. They are informative, but I think also sometimes people get a little bit too tied to the metrics, and you always want to look at them in context of what you're doing because there is no real correlation between anything.
Even Facebook did a very famous study on that, using their own data, right? Like, which is all the user data, like millions and millions,
All of
billions.
it.
And it was the same kind of thing, like no correlation between purchases and click through, no correlation between engagement and like. So like, we're not a good advertisement for that, but they were trying to prove that hey, it's not about the actions. Like you can do a brand ad and get a view, and that will lead to a purchase just as much as any other thing. So like, and yeah, now with their sort of MMM model running in the background, Robin and stuff, it's there's a bit more rigor around some of those like less obvious metrics, maybe contributing to sales that would otherwise be looked over. So yeah, very much with you as well. Yeah, it's been proven many times. Even the most basic thing that most digital agencies sell, which is like, hey, we're going to increase your traffic and that will lead to more sales. I'm like, yeah, that's been disproven like categorically. Like even something, but everyone kind of believes this. I don't know what the deal is. It's kind of like more volumetric here. The most visible volumetric will lead to more sales. Yeah, it doesn't work like that. Sorry.
I feel like just people forget that you're selling to people. Like it's so easy to see everything as just numbers where you're like, okay, number goes up, my number goes up, right? But it's it's not like that. Like you can probably have every single person in the world look at your site, but if they're not in the market to buy the thing you're selling, like they're not going to buy it. Like you can't actually convince people to buy a thing they don't want, right? Like you can make them aware of the problem, right? But you can't sell your thing to literally everyone. So
Yeah, it's like this Eldorado quest of like finding the magic sort of bullet, and if we get enough data and have enough tools and everything, there'll be some kind of formula. And I see a lot of like startup teams like with more of an engineering sort of mindset try to do this, like go down this like fruitless path of like trying to hack the system and find out this formula. Like yeah, if you understand just a tiny bit more, that's like not a great use of your time. Like
like a big company makes sense. I think when you get to a certain size, like sure, you probably need to run 1,000 tests to get like an incremental 0.1%. But that incremental 0.1% is millions of dollars. Like, yeah, probably do that. When you're a startup, like no, try every distribution channel also. Like this is the thing. I mean, I'm a Facebook ads guy, I'm like a TikTok ads guy, whatever. Like I'm doing creative strategy. But also sometimes it's not the right thing to pour your money into. Like there are dozens of distribution networks that can make you money outside of the ad platform. Like I think there's also been this huge push, and honestly, like I've been a part of it. So like maybe I'm at fault too. Like I won't dodge blame here, but there's been this huge surge of brands on Facebook because VC money was cheap, right? It was super cheap to get. Interest rates were very low. These companies were spending millions and millions of dollars. They're like, we need to put our money somewhere. We need a return, and so you had all these ecom brands getting millions of dollars, and they didn't know how to figure out how to actually do marketing. A lot of them are young guys, and they're like, okay, let's put it on Facebook. Like we know that works. They get all this spend on Facebook, and one thing, I mean, it floods the market and inflates the value of the platform. Where you have all this creative going on, CPMS go up because there's all this competition that shouldn't actually be there. They're not even profitable, but because they have VC money, they're just pouring more of it because they're like, okay, at least we're getting sales, and they just need to grow, right? But there's so many other things they could have done. Like if you spent that $5 million on like getting salespeople to go door to door, you'd probably do better, right? Like at least they can be targeted. Not to say that Facebook doesn't work, and it has definitely provided incredible returns, and even now it is still the machine you put $1 into and get 5 back. Like I'm not saying that's not the case. Um, I just think that there's been kind of an over reliance on it. And you mentioned a little bit earlier of the creative agencies being, or agencies in general going, hey, you need lots of creative to put on the platform. Like, yeah, I mean, you're paying them to put creative on the platform. Like, of course, I'm going to come on here and say, you need more creative, right? Like, pay me to get creative in the account because it makes you more money. And most of the time that's true. But like, for example, I have a client that he just consolidated his entire account into 4 ads. We made the first batch we made him, he got a hit ad. The thing's chopping up lots of his spend, and he's like, oh, I don't really need anything else. Like I'm just gonna put all my spend behind this thing. And like, yeah, like sometimes that can work. I think part of it is like don't believe what everyone is saying online because mostly they're trying to sell you something. And I think this is kind of one of my big points that I wanted to get to. And like I'm like a kind of a guru here too, so do your own research. But I, I see this a lot, which is there's no barrier to entry in the advertising industry, at least in the digital advertising space. And so what I've seen over the past few years, especially as Shopify has grown, and you've had lots of these e-com brands, again with VC money, they're trying to put money into ads. They don't know who to hire. They don't know anyone in the space. And so you can have a kid straight out of school, even before college, right? There are kids just jumping in and going, hey, I'm going to start an ad agency. And partially, like, it's because there are people selling courses on like how to start your own ad agency, which is a hilarious grift of its own.
Like Gary Vee and who was that other guy with the cars, the famous cars? They all had the same kind of thing. It was like, hey, I'm rich, I've made it, with some like they'd go to a real estate house like that had really good cars in it, like because I had a real estate friend with a mansion. They go in and pretend it's their own house, and then there'd be some Lamborghinis in the background and be like, so you can make it like me if you just, use my formula, sign up to my coaching course, so you can create your own social media business, and become a millionaire. And yeah, all these college kids gone on board, pay the $297 for this vanilla kind of course, and then you've got this like proliferation of vendors. There's no shortage of vendors out there, is there?
Yeah, no. I mean, there's probably 10,000 or more at this point. I mean, I think Grant Cardone. Is it Grant Cardone? Is that who you're talking about?
No, it was someone else. But yeah, he did that sort of similar
But
thing. I think he's
similar
scamming like
thing.
some finance play or something now, isn't he?
Yeah, but the point is clear that there's thousands of these people. And if you just go on LinkedIn and Twitter for 10 minutes, you'll find people with just no experience at all in their background telling you how you should be doing, like running your business. Have never run a business before, like haven't run ads before. And they're like, this is the creative you need. And to be fair, like oftentimes they're doing like breakdowns of other people's creative. But the problem with even doing something like that, which maybe even shows some level of inexperience, is yes, you can break down an ad and analyze why it worked, but as we know from the data, there's no correlation. So even having like a thing that looks like a banger ad, it might not have performed. And I promise you, they're not showing you the data, right? Because no client is going to let you publicly share the performance of their ad. And if you don't have the actual real performance of the ad itself, you shouldn't like imprint that into your taste because you're wrong, right? Like you don't actually know if that thing worked. So that's one issue. And then the other issue is Facebook in particular is a channel where, yes, very often you can put in $1, get 5 back with no other channels, nothing else. You're a brand new brand. It does work sometimes. But most of the time, especially the ads that you see getting analyzed by these gurus on LinkedIn and Twitter and so on, they worked really well or got this publicity because there are 10 other channels that are running in conjunction with Facebook that are filling up the upper funnel so the bottom funnel absolutely smashes. But it's also because they have TV ads, they have Google ads running, they have programmatic running, they have Tatari running, they have billboards all over. Like Casper is a great example of this, where like everyone's like, oh, they built their brand on direct response. Like, no, they didn't. They had freaking billboards in the subways in New York City. They were buying out entire trains. Like, they had hundreds of millions in VC money. Like, analyzing a Casper ad isn't useful.
They still probably didn't do so well in retrospect anyway, like their valuation.
No.
So it's like, what are you using as a test case? I mean, that was the central reason I looked at that Think Different ad, the Apple ad that I wrote about. It's like, I think the more award-winning and famous the ad is, and the more people are breaking down, probably the less effective it actually is. Like, if you have a really effective ad, do you want to tell someone that it's working really well? Like, no. So number one, there's a disincentive to disclose, like in the first place, that the ads are really, really good. And in fact, I think the inverse is also true. Like, the more famous it is, the more people like it, probably the less effective it is, really, in reality. It's like a red herring. And we know this because when agencies have their creative, they want to submit that for an award to get an award, right? So if it hasn't gone well, what can they get out of it? Well, they can get some political capital for the CMO and, big note themselves. So what do? They pay off somebody at the award shows, a very generous submission entry. Sorry, not pay off. I mean, I didn't say that. But you can submit them into these shows. You have a couple of friends that are judges on the inside and go, hey, can you give me the gold award for that? Like, yeah, sure. And bang, that's kind of how they get. And then, some person on LinkedIn's analyzing, going, oh my God, that was such a good ad. It won like 13 gold, whatever. I'm like, yeah. what success sort of mark are we talking about here? It's definitely not revenue. So yeah, and I figured that I Think Different was really not that effective. And the best ad of all time, 1984, got Steve Jobs fired. So how is that a good ad? I don't get it.
It's funny. That's my go-to reference also. On the converse side, also, to paint the other picture, the most effective ad of all time, I mean, we don't know this for sure, obviously, but the first ad ever put on digital was AT&T. This is my favorite ad ever. Like, we gotta put an image on it on this video or something. It's literally like, it's just digital, super pixely, a bunch of colors, and there's a line that's going, "I bet you won't click here." Like, and then there's just a little button, and it had something like a 44% click through rate. Basically 1 in 2 people were clicking there. They didn't even know what it was. Like, it didn't say anything about AT&T, but it drove people to the site, and AT&T was AT&T, and the monopoly would probably had a crazy conversion rate at the time. So,
speaking of gurus and famous ads and stuff and people shilling things, you showed me that thing at the Reddit. That was hilarious, by the way. You showed me the Reddit thing about the guru ranking factor. Can you tell us about that? Because I'll put a screenshot of the spreadsheet and stuff.
yeah, I love it. There's a subreddit called Decoding the Gurus, and I think there's actually an associated podcast in which these guys will actually deeply analyze people who are gurus. So anyone who's got a podcast who's shilling information, and they have specific metrics for all of them. You can put on the screen, that way you can actually go through the metrics. But I would encourage you to look at that. And anytime you're taking some kind of advice from like LinkedIn, Twitter, any other platform, if someone's telling you what to do, take a look at that these ranking and see how many points you can rack up in your head for the person who's talking to you, because they might not actually know what they're talking about. There's one really, really good way of doing this. I'm going to shout this guy, Cedric Chin. He has a blog called Common Cog, and it's my favorite business blog. It's absolutely incredible. And he talks about this concept called believability, which I think actually comes from Ray Dalio. So I should properly attribute all of this information. And the idea is that someone is more or less believable dependent on how many times they have successfully done the thing that you're talking about. So and the minimum limit of taking advice from someone should be 3 times. If you know for sure, or they can prove in some way that 3 times they've done the thing that they're talking about, then they're believable. The more times they've done it, obviously, the better. So in this case, with someone who does advertising, if they're running an agency, if they're an individual or something, can they prove to you that they have made ads work in a way that you can really believe? So this is another problem with advertising. It's really easy to just make a fake screenshot of an ad account and go, "Hey, look, I crushed it. Like, this performance is amazing." And to some extent, like, it feels like a red flag now because so many people do this. Like, if someone sends me like, "Hey, this is what I can do for an account," I'm just like, it actually, in my brain, I'm like, can you, or did you just like doctor a photo, right? Exactly. Conversely, there are people, like, especially larger agencies, that maybe you'll get a direct referral from someone. Like, they'll actually have their clients go and talk to other people. If you have a full recorded video, of any kind of production value, and it's a client actually saying, "Yeah, here's what they did for my brand," usually you can trust that a little more. Obviously, they can be a friend, but I think in most cases, that adds a little bit of trust factor. I think that's why you see so much social proof now in the agency world as well, is because it's so easy to doctor things. And I think once Sora takes off, or whatever AI tool ends up being kind of the dominant tool, if it's Runway ML or some other app, that's going to make it really dangerous, because deepfakes are already getting pretty far, and we're already seeing deepfakes being used in ads for like UGC content, which I think that's borderline. I mean, that's kind of fine, right? I mean, you're going to pay someone to do it anyway. But with agency services, you can have fake clients, right? You're just going to make a deep fake. And here's Elon Musk talking about how much we crushed it for Tesla. So it's going to get pretty hard to believe some of these things pretty soon.
You mentioned a couple of blogs and other sources of inspiration, chock-a-block with that. But any books that you've read recently that sort of like, you'd recommend on this topic that's really changed your thinking for the better?
This is so good. First plug, you got to say Influence by Robert Cialdini. If you haven't read it already, it's absolutely incredible. He's got 7 things. You should use them all. That would probably be number 1. Thinking Fast and Slow is another big one. Daniel Kahneman,
he died,
recently
actually
passed. Yeah, rest in peace. It's a slog, but he fortunately puts like bullet points of everything in the book. And there's a book called Marketing to Mind States, and it takes some of the Thinking Fast and Slow stuff and makes it more marketing heavy. So that's really useful. The long and short of it is really short one by Les Binet. This is one of my favorite books that talks about how you should balance your spend to longer term goals and shorter term goals, which I think a lot of people in performance space kind of forget. That's a long-term game. Don't do sales 100% of the time. Like, that's probably going to kill the company. So that's another really good one. In terms of creativity, there are numerous books and resources on creativity techniques. Good one is Thinker Toys. That's probably the one go-to.
What about over to your chance to plug yourself. What are you working on? What do you want to shell out? Shell the community.
Yeah, after talking about all those gurus,
Yeah.
hire me to do your Facebook ad. I would say the biggest differentiator and the services that I do that are unique in this space, I will do actual like customer interviews for you. I think that's something that people don't want to do, but I have a product marketing background as well. So I'll come in, interview your customers. We'll turn those into ads. So this is the best part about doing customer interviews. And I think another piece people miss is usually you can just ask them like, hey, can I run some of this for ad content? And you get the best ads from that because they're authentically in an interview telling you how much they love your product because you're asking them all these questions about it. So there's nothing realer than that. So that's one service I offer. Another one is actually doing like research for you. So this is another part, just like aggregating content, information, and then coming up with ad ideas. So I have a service where we'll just come up with lots and lots of ad concepts for you. As I was saying, like, you know, you kind of need 100 ideas to have one good one. And most people just start with the one first idea they come up with, which is not usually great. So we provide a stream of concepts for people so that they can actually turn those into real content. So those are probably my most unique offerings right now.
And if someone wants to get in contact with you, what's the best method?
I have an email, brett@thecreativestrategysite.com. That site will be live soon. So that's one way. Hit me up on LinkedIn. Like I'm always on LinkedIn and I'm around posting. You'll see. So please connect with me.
Thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate the chat. Yeah, if anyone's interested in creative strategy or getting into a bit more, I think that's a huge overview that they could sort of deep dive if they really want to do it. But, you know, most people just go, oh, too hard. I'll get someone else to do it. You know what I mean? Generally. But I think this, at least, like, you know, understanding from a basic level that sort of process that goes through in the background, and, you know, a really good ad pops out. Like, there's a lot beneath that sort of iceberg that goes on when you're hiring an agency or someone to do this work, if you're doing it properly. So, yeah, thanks for running through that with us. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, John.